Hey everyone, and welcome to our deep dive, into the world of gender identity. It's a topic that's just so relevant today, and I think, I'm really excited to unpack all of this with you guys.
Yeah.
We've got some really fascinating articles and research lined up that really get into the heart of, what gender identity is and why understanding it matters so much.
Yeah. It's more than just being in the know, though, right?
Yeah.
I mean, this deep dive is really about, fostering empathy and respect for all individuals.
Absolutely. And it's easy to think we have a handle on this topic, but there are so many nuances and layers that, even the most informed among us can discover something new.
Absolutely.
So,
The core concept of gender identity is that it's an individual's deeply personal understanding of themselves in relation to gender.
okay.
It's about how you feel inside,
Right.
not just how you look.
Okay, so it's not about outward appearances or societal expectations, but rather about an internal sense of self.
Exactly. And this internal sense of self can align with the sex you were assigned at birth.
Right.
That's what we call cisgender.
Right.
But for some, it differs.
Yeah.
And that's what we refer to as transgender.
So someone assigned female at birth who feels like a woman is cisgender, but someone assigned male at birth who feels like a woman is transgender.
Exactly.
It's all about that internal feeling.
Yes.
That's a really important distinction.
It is. And this is where it starts to get really interesting because gender identity isn't just this simple binary of male and female.
Right.
There's a whole spectrum of identities out there.
Right. We've got terms like non-binary, genderqueer, gender fluid.
Yeah.
It's incredible how diverse human experience truly is.
And it's not just about labels.
yeah.
These identities reflect real lived experiences.
Right.
Take gender fluid, for example. Some people experience shifts in their gender identity over time.
Right.
It's not about having two fixed identities,
Yeah.
but a more fluid experience.
Yeah. I think what's so fascinating here is that research suggests gender identity starts developing really early on in childhood.
You're right. Often by the age of 3 or 4,
Wow.
kids already have a sense of their own gender identity.
Wow, that's incredible. So think back to when you were just a little kid running around. You probably had a sense of your own gender identity even then.
And, the way we see and express gender is also heavily influenced by culture.
Mm-hmm.
It's not universal. Some cultures recognize more than just male and female.
Like the two-spirit identity in some indigenous cultures, right? I remember reading about that.
Exactly. It's a beautiful example of how gender can be understood and experienced in ways that challenge Western norms.
Right.
The two-spirit identity is deeply rooted in history and tradition, holding a significant place in many indigenous communities.
It really highlights how our understanding of gender is shaped by the society we live in. It makes you wonder how many other diverse gender identities exist across different cultures around the world.
Absolutely. And this is where it becomes crucial to understand the impact of societal norms and expectations.
Yeah.
When someone's gender identity clashes with what society dictates,
Right.
it can lead to real challenges and even mental health issues.
That makes total sense. Feeling like your true self isn't accepted can be incredibly distressing.
Right.
That's why affirming someone's gender identity is so important.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
about validating their experiences and creating a space where they can be themselves without fear of judgment or discrimination.
So let's dive into some of the common gender identities we hear about. We've touched upon cisgender and transgender, but there's so many others.
Right.
What about non-binary, for example?
Non-binary folks don't identify strictly as male or female.
Okay.
They might feel like they fall somewhere in between, outside of, or even combination of those categories.
It's about recognizing that gender isn't a rigid binary, right?
Yeah,
There's so much more to it.
exactly. And then we have agender, which is basically not identifying with any gender.
Yeah.
Agender individuals may describe themselves as genderless, gender neutral, or having no gender at all.
So while non-binary individuals might exist somewhere on the spectrum between male and female,
Yeah,
agender folks don't feel a connection to either.
precisely. And this is where terms like bigender and pangender come in.
Okay.
Bigender individuals connect with two genders, which could be male and female, but also could include other identities.
And pangender is about identifying with many or all genders.
That's right. It really emphasizes the spectrum of human experience when it comes to gender.
Yeah.
Each individual's experience can be so unique, and that's something to be celebrated, not dismissed or invalidated.
I think what's really interesting is that we're seeing more and more awareness of less common identities too, like demigender.
Right. Demigender captures those who identify partially with one gender.
Okay.
It's like one part of their identity might be male or female, and the other part could be another gender or even no gender at all.
It's like a blend of different gender experiences. It really challenges us to think beyond the traditional binary and embrace the complexity of how people experience gender.
And that's just the tip of the iceberg. There are so many other less commonly known identities out there,
Right.
each offering a unique perspective on gender. It's a fascinating and ever-evolving landscape. It's amazing how we keep uncovering more nuanced identities, right? It really speaks volumes about how our understanding of gender is evolving.
It really does. It's like we're peeling back the layers of an onion and discovering so much complexity and beauty. I remember when I first started learning about gender identity, I thought it was just about male and female. Now I realize it's so much more than that.
It's a constant journey of discovery, and it challenges us to stay curious and open-minded.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
So what are some of these less common identities that we might not be as familiar with?
Well, we touched upon gender fluid, where someone's experience of their gender shifts over time. But have you ever heard of gender flux?
Gender flux, that's a new one for me.
It's similar to gender fluid, but instead of shifting between different genders, the intensity of the gender experience fluctuates.
Okay.
So someone who identifies as gender flux might feel very strongly connected to a particular gender one day, but then feel a weaker connection or even a different connection another day.
That's a really interesting concept. So it's not about the gender itself changing, but rather the strength of their connection to that gender at any given moment.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's all about that fluidity and the dynamic nature of their gender experience.
Okay.
And then we have another identity called gender void.
Gender void. Okay, now I'm really intrigued.
Gender void individuals don't identify with any gender, much like agender folks. However, there's often an additional feeling of emptiness or a lack of connection to the concept of gender altogether.
So if a gender is about neutrality or a lack of gender, gender void adds the sense of a void or emptiness where gender is expected to be.
Precisely. It really highlights that even within the gender spectrum, there's a lot of diversity and nuance in how people experience their lack of gender. And then there's gray gender, which I find really fascinating.
Gray gender. Okay, I'm starting to see a pattern here. A lot of these less common identities seem to exist on a spectrum or in that in-between space.
You're absolutely right. Gray gender is all about those subtle shades of gray genders. Individuals who identify as gray gender might have a weak connection to a particular gender, or maybe their gender identity shifts or fluctuates, but doesn't fit neatly into any specific category.
So it's about embracing that ambiguity and fluidity.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we have omnigender, which encompasses the experience of identifying with all genders.
It's like saying, I see myself reflected in all genders. It's such an inclusive way of understanding gender identity.
It is. And there's another identity called polygender, which is similar but with a slight distinction.
I'm all ears. What's the difference?
While omnigender embraces all genders, polygender individuals identify with multiple genders, but not necessarily all of them.
Okay.
Their connection to those genders might also shift or change over time.
So it's about having a personal and dynamic connection to multiple genders. It's incredible how these identities challenge the idea of gender as a fixed and rigid concept.
Absolutely. And as we explore these less common identities, it becomes clear that respecting and supporting those who identify with them is crucial. Even something as simple as using the correct pronouns can make a world of difference.
That's a great point. Pronouns might seem like a small thing, but they play a huge role in affirming someone's gender identity and making them feel seen and respected.
You're absolutely right. It's about recognizing and validating their lived experiences.
Yeah.
And, speaking of expression, something I've always found fascinating is how non-binary individuals express their gender identity in ways that challenge traditional norms.
It's like they're breaking free from those rigid boxes society tries to put us in. Androgynous fashion is a great example of that, right?
Exactly. It's all about blending elements that are typically seen as masculine or feminine to create a unique and empowering style. Imagine feeling comfortable and confident rocking a power suit one day and a flowy dress the next.
It's about expressing yourself freely without being limited by societal expectations.
Absolutely. And it's not limited to just clothing.
Yeah.
Hairstyles, makeup, accessories, body modifications, they can all be used to express gender identity in ways that defy those traditional norms.
It's like a revolution in self-expression where people are reclaiming their bodies and identities and saying, this is who I am, and I'm not going to let society tell me how to express it.
It's incredibly empowering, and it's inspiring to see so many people, especially younger generations, embracing this freedom of expression. They're challenging the status quo and showing the world that gender is not a one-size-fits-all concept.
And that brings up another important point. Respect and acceptance are essential. It's not just about tolerance. It's about celebrating the diversity of gender identities and expressions.
You're absolutely right. It's about creating spaces where people feel safe and supported to be themselves, regardless of their gender identity.
Mhm.
And we can all contribute to that by educating ourselves, challenging our own biases, and advocating for systemic change.
I agree. It's a collective effort that involves listening with empathy, asking questions, and being willing to learn and grow. We need to create a world where everyone feels valued and celebrated for who they are.
And that includes advocating for policies and legislation that protect the rights of transgender and non-binary individuals, ensuring they have equal access to healthcare, education, employment, and housing.
We need to break down those barriers and dismantle the systems of oppression that have historically marginalized and discriminated against transgender and non-binary people. It's a fight that requires all of us to step up and use our voices.
You're absolutely right. Every voice matters, and every action, no matter how small, can contribute to creating a more just and equitable world.
It's like we're all on this journey together, moving towards a world where everyone can live authentically and freely. It's a world worth fighting for. And even though there's still a long way to go, it's encouraging to see the progress we're making. More and more people are speaking out against transphobia and discrimination, and we're seeing a growing awareness of the diversity of gender identities.
It gives me hope for the future. The more we learn and understand about gender identity, the more inclusive and accepting our society becomes.
And it's not just about transgender and non-binary individuals. Challenging those rigid gender norms benefits everyone. It frees us all to express ourselves more authentically and create a society where everyone has the opportunity to thrive.
Absolutely. It's about breaking down those boxes and recognizing that gender is a spectrum, not a binary.
Yeah.
And when we embrace that spectrum, we create a world where everyone can be their true selves.
I love that. It's about celebrating the beauty and complexity of human experience and recognizing that our differences are what make us unique and special.
I couldn't agree more. It's about recognizing that we're all in this together, and that creating a more inclusive and equitable world requires a collective effort.
And it all starts with education, empathy, and a willingness to challenge our own biases. It's
Um,
about having those uncomfortable conversations, asking those tough questions, and being open to learning from others.
You're absolutely right. We need to approach these conversations with humility, recognizing that we don't have all the answers and that there's always more to learn.
So what are some of the emerging trends or areas of research that you find particularly interesting within the realm of gender identity?
One area that I find really fascinating is the intersectionality of gender identity with other aspects of identity.
Like race, ethnicity, culture, disability. It's important to remember that gender identity doesn't exist in a vacuum.
Exactly. For instance, the experiences of transgender people of color might be very different from those of white transgender individuals. And we need to be mindful of how those intersecting identities can create unique challenges and opportunities.
It's about recognizing that everyone's journey is unique and that there's no one-size-fits-all approach to understanding or supporting transgender and non-binary individuals.
Absolutely. Another area I find exciting is the impact of technology on gender identity and expression. With the rise of social media and online platforms, people have more opportunities than ever to connect with others who share their identities and explore different ways of expressing themselves.
It's like technology is creating new spaces for people to find community and belonging, especially those who might feel isolated or marginalized in their offline lives. I've heard stories of people finding online support groups or connecting with others who identify similarly, which can be incredibly validating.
It's incredible. And beyond connecting with others, technology also provides access to information and resources about gender identity transitioning and support services.
It's like having a whole world of knowledge and support at your fingertips. It's empowering to know that these resources are out there, especially for people who might not have access to them in their local communities.
Exactly. And as technology keeps evolving, I'm excited to see how it will continue to shape our understanding of gender identity and create even more opportunities for inclusivity and self-expression.
Me too. It feels like we're on the cusp of a new era where gender is becoming more fluid, less bound by those rigid social norms.
I agree. And I think it's a positive development.
Yeah.
The more we challenge those traditional gender roles, the more inclusive and equitable our society becomes.
It's not just about transgender and non-binary individuals either. Challenging those norms benefits everyone. It frees us all from restrictive expectations and allows us to express ourselves more authentically.
Absolutely. Breaking down those boxes allows everyone to thrive, no matter their gender identity or expression.
What a beautiful thought. It's about embracing diversity and recognizing that our differences are what make us unique and enrich our society.
I couldn't agree more. It's about recognizing that we're all connected and that creating a more just and equitable world requires collaboration and understanding.
And that brings us back to the importance of education and empathy. The more we learn about each other's experiences, the more we grow as individuals and as a society.
Absolutely. It's an ongoing journey, and the more we embrace it, the more inclusive and accepting our world becomes.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground today. From the basics of gender identity to the evolving landscape and emerging trends, it's been an incredibly insightful conversation.
It has, and I hope our listeners feel inspired to continue learning and engaging with this vital topic.
We encourage everyone listening to do their own research, challenge their assumptions, and most importantly, be respectful and supportive of those around them.
And remember, understanding gender identity is a journey, not a destination. The more we learn, the more we grow, and the more inclusive our world becomes.
Wow, it's incredible to think about how much we've already explored in this deep dive.
Right.
We've talked about, definitions, common misconceptions, cultural influences, emerging trends.
Yeah.
But I feel like there's always more to discover, right?
You're absolutely right. Gender identity is such a multifaceted topic, and our understanding of it continues to evolve. I think one of the most important takeaways is that it's an ongoing journey, both for individuals and for society as a whole.
Yeah, that's a great point. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what are some key things you hope our listeners will take away from our conversation today?
Well, first and foremost, I hope they gain a deeper understanding of what gender identity is and how it differs from biological sex.
Mm-hmm.
We've debunked a lot of myths and misconceptions today, and I hope that helps clear up any confusion or misinformation folks might have encountered.
It's about recognizing that gender is an internal experience, not just about outward appearances or societal expectations.
Exactly. And I hope our listeners also come away with a greater sense of empathy and respect for the diversity of gender identities and expressions.
Mhm.
We've explored a vast spectrum of identities today, and it's crucial to remember that each one represents a valid and lived experience.
It's about creating a world where everyone feels seen, heard, and respected for who they are, regardless of their gender identity.
Absolutely. And that involves not just passive acceptance, but active affirmation.
Right.
Using someone's correct pronouns, for example, is a simple but powerful act of respect.
It's about taking the time to learn and use the pronouns that people identify with, even if they're unfamiliar to us. It shows that we care about their experiences and that we're willing to make an effort to create a more inclusive environment.
And, beyond individual actions, systemic change is crucial too. We need to advocate for policies that protect the rights of transgender and non-binary individuals, ensuring they have equal access to healthcare education, employment, and housing.
It's about creating a world where everyone has the opportunity to thrive, regardless of their gender identity. And that requires us to challenge those systems of oppression that have historically marginalized and discriminated against transgender and non-binary people.
You're absolutely right. It's a fight that requires all of us to step up and use our voices to advocate for justice and equality. And I believe that the more we learn and understand about gender identity, the more equipped we are to be effective allies and advocates.
It's about having those uncomfortable conversations, challenging our own biases, and being willing to learn from others. And, it's not just about transgender and non-binary individuals. Challenging those rigid gender norms benefits everyone. It frees us all to express ourselves more authentically and create a more just and equitable society for all.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that we're all interconnected and that our liberation is bound together. When we fight for the rights of one group, we fight for the rights of all.
What a powerful message. So as we wrap up our deep dive, is there anything else you'd like to leave our listeners with today?
I think the most important thing is to remember that the journey to understanding gender identity is ongoing. It's not about reaching a destination or having all the answers. It's about staying curious, challenging our assumptions, and being open to learning and growing.
It's about embracing the complexity and beauty of human experience and recognizing that our differences are what make us unique and special. And with that, we've come to the end of our deep dive into the world of gender identity. Thank you for joining us.